Evelyn Hart often described her life as comfortably predictable, though the phrase held a softness that masked her growing uncertainty. Every morning, the narrow beams of sunlight slipped through the bedroom blinds and painted gentle lines across the walls, and she would lie there for a quiet moment, listening to the distant hum of city life. It was the only part of the day when she truly felt present. By the time Caleb Mercer stirred beside her, the clock of responsibility had already begun ticking in her mind. Caleb rose quickly, as he always did. His attention moved through the room with methodical precision, checking emails, skimming notifications, mentally organizing meetings, long before he acknowledged the warmth of the blankets or the scent of freshly brewed coffee. Evelyn watched him with a practiced mixture of affection and longing. She knew he loved her, his loyalty was not in question. What troubled her, quietly and increasingly, was how his love seemed to have slipped into the shadows of all the things he pursued with sharper focus. She carried her coffee to her desk near the living room window, where her laptop waited with its usual parade of design briefs. As a digital designer, color palettes and creative layouts filled her daily hours. It was work she enjoyed, work that made her feel expressive and valued. Yet even as she adjusted icons and experimented with typography, her attention drifted back to Caleb. How distant he had become, how unreachable he felt despite sharing the same space. Their life together had once felt vibrant. She remembered their university days vividly, nights of studying at quiet cafes, shared jokes whispered across lecture halls, spontaneous road trips to nowhere in particular. Caleb's ambition used to spark hers. He was curious then, overflowing with ideas, always asking what she dreamed of accomplishing next. His attention had felt like sunlight, warm, generous, and present, but marriage had changed the rhythm. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. The shift came like the slow settling of dust, unnoticeable at first, until she reached out one day and found the surface coated in something she couldn't quite wipe away. In the early months after their wedding, Caleb's new job had demanded more hours, more meetings, more travel. Evelyn told herself it was temporary, the natural strain of ambition. She admired his drive and never wanted to anchor him. Yet each late night, each unanswered text, each missed dinner layered quietly on her heart. She never accused him of anything, she simply waited. She believed patience was a form of devotion. Caleb often tried to reassure her. He would kiss her forehead, promise that things would settle, tell her she was his steady place. But his eyes carried fatigue, and his words, though sincere, lacked the depth of presence she needed. Evelyn didn't crave grand gestures, she only wanted to feel that she was still part of his inner world. One Thursday evening, while she prepared dinner, Caleb called to say he'd be late again. The apology in his voice was habitual, almost rehearsed. Evelyn stood at the counter, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the quiet echo of her own disappointment. She hung up gently, finished the meal alone, and stored his portion in the fridge. She ate slowly, her fork scraping softly against the plate, each bite carrying the weight of another evening spent in solitude. After washing the dishes, she sat on the couch and opened her journal. She didn't write often, but when she did, the words poured out as though a dam inside her had cracked. She wrote about feeling invisible in her own home, about the tired ache in her chest, about the version of herself she feared she was becoming, quiet, patient to the point of erasure, fading into the background of Caleb's fast-moving life. She wrote without anger. It wasn't bitterness that filled her pen, but a quiet grief. She missed him. She missed them. It was around this time that Jordan Hale reappeared in their lives. Caleb introduced him on a Saturday afternoon, an unexpected drop-in that caught Evelyn mid-tea making. Jordan carried an air of easy warmth, the kind that immediately softened a room. His smile was casual, unforced, and his eyes held a familiarity that made Evelyn feel as though he was genuinely observing the world around him rather than moving through it on autopilot. Caleb explained that Jordan was an old friend from his early work days, back in town for a short while. Evelyn welcomed him politely, offering tea, and the three of them settled around the living room. While the conversation flowed, Evelyn noticed something small but undeniable. Jordan listened with an attentiveness that felt rare. He asked questions, nodded thoughtfully, responded with presence. He seemed naturally tuned into emotional frequencies that Caleb had long stopped noticing. It wasn't attraction. It was recognition, of being seen. After Jordan left, Caleb seemed energized, lighter than usual. He reminisced about their old memories, laughing in ways Evelyn hadn't heard for months. She watched him with soft admiration, quietly grateful for any moment in which he felt more alive. That night, he fell asleep faster than usual, and Evelyn lay awake beside him, wondering when she had stopped being the source of his lightness. Over the next few weeks, life continued in its familiar rhythm. Caleb's workload increased, deadlines grew more intense, and his time at home grew thinner. Evelyn told herself not to mind. She told herself to be understanding. Yet each morning when she sat at her desk, arranging colors and shapes, she felt the hollow space inside her widening. One evening, while Caleb was away on a business trip, Jordan texted her. Nothing personal, just a friendly message checking how she was doing after a storm had hit the city earlier that day. She replied with equal casualness, but when she set down her phone, she felt something shift. That it wasn't excitement. It wasn't danger. It was simply the realization that someone had thought of her. The thought lingered long after the conversation ended. That night, as she lay alone in bed, Evelyn stared at the ceiling and listened to the distant sound of rain against the window. She felt the first whisper of something she couldn't yet name, something that both frightened and comforted her. It lingered in the quiet space between longing and uncertainty. She turned onto her side, clutching the blanket around her. For the first time, she wondered what else might change if the distance between her and Caleb continued to grow. The question settled deep within her, silent but heavy, and though she tried to dismiss it, she sensed that life, as she knew it, had begun to shift in ways she could no longer ignore.
Evelyn didn't intend for anything to change, yet change arrived quietly, soft as breath, subtle as a shift in lighting that you only notice when the room feels different. It began with a simple message from Jordan Hale the morning after the storm. He asked if her apartment had stayed dry, if she'd slept well, if she needed anything. The tone was friendly, considerate, and unassuming, yet the effect on her was sharper than she expected. His attention landed on her with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. She typed a brief reply, careful and polite, telling him all was well. But the moment she hit send, she realized she was waiting for the next message. The realization unsettled her. She set her phone aside and focused on her design projects, telling herself that emotions weren't facts, and loneliness could distort even the simplest gestures. Yet, even as she worked, her mind wandered toward Jordan's kindness and the ease with which he made her feel visible. Over the coming week, their interactions remained light, brief exchanges over something Caleb mentioned, a shared joke from a previous conversation, or a message checking whether she was safe during a citywide blackout. None of it ventured into forbidden territory, yet each moment chipped away at the emotional distance she had built around herself for protection. Caleb, meanwhile, was drifting deeper into his work. His days expanded with calls, meetings, and urgent deadlines. When he came home, his greetings felt hurried, his conversations clipped. Evelyn watched him move through rooms with a purposeful but detached energy, as though he carried an invisible weight she could neither lift nor understand. She made efforts, cooking meals he liked, inviting him on short walks, asking about his projects, but he responded with distracted gratitude, promising they would have more time soon. Soon never came. One night, he returned late once again, exhaustion etched into every line of his posture. He placed a soft kiss on her forehead, whispered apologies for missing dinner, and immediately retreated into a series of emails he claimed couldn't wait. Evelyn sat on the couch watching the glow of his laptop reflect off his face. She felt like an ornament in the room, present but unnoticed, loved yet unattended. It was during one of Caleb's business trips that the emotional boundary first shifted. Evelyn was returning from the grocery store when she ran into Jordan near their building. He was sitting on a bench beneath a blooming willow tree, talking on the phone. When he saw her, he ended the call and offered to help carry her bags. She hesitated, considering the implications, but accepted. His presence brought a warmth she hadn't recognized until that moment, an unintentional comfort that felt both soothing and dangerous. Inside her apartment, Jordan placed the bags on the counter. Evelyn thanked him, expecting him to leave immediately, but he lingered, asking how she'd been managing while Caleb was away. His concern was genuine, and for the first time in a long while, someone asked her a question without rushing past the answer. Evelyn tried to keep her reply measured, but her voice carried the truth she hadn't meant to reveal. "It's been lonely," she admitted softly. Jordan nodded in understanding, not judgment. Lonely doesn't mean weak, he said. It just means you still care. The sentence struck her deeply. She hadn't admitted her loneliness aloud before. Hearing someone acknowledge it made it real in a way she hadn't prepared for. Their conversation lasted only a few minutes, but afterward Evelyn stood in the quiet of her living room, feeling something shift inside her, an emotional door creaking open, not wide enough to step through, but enough to see the light on the other side. She knew she had to be careful. Lines were thin. Shadows were deceptive. She reminded herself she was married, devoted, committed. Yet the truth settled like a whisper in her chest. She could not deny the comfort she felt in Jordan's presence. Days passed, and the distance between her and Caleb grew more pronounced. He seemed unaware of her inner turmoil, and Evelyn tried not to hold that against him. Still, every night she lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, feeling the widening space between them like a physical divide. One evening, when Caleb was again away, Jordan invited her to join him at a quiet coffee shop nearby. His tone held no pressure, only an invitation to step outside her loneliness for a moment. Evelyn hesitated for a long time. She knew the importance of small decisions, how they could be the hinge on which entire futures turned. But the silence in her apartment felt suffocating, and the idea of human conversation seemed like a lifeline. She went. They sat near the back of the cafe, where low lighting softened the atmosphere and muted conversations filled the room with a comforting hum. Jordan asked about her work, her projects, her interests, things Caleb no longer had time to ask. Evelyn spoke cautiously at first, but as the minutes unfolded, she found herself telling him small details she rarely shared with anyone. In return, Jordan offered his own stories, past failures, turning points, quiet regrets. Nothing inappropriate was said, yet the emotional intimacy they exchanged carried weight. The moment Evelyn realized her heart had stepped beyond safety came unexpectedly. Jordan was describing a loss from his past when his voice softened, and he looked at her with unmistakable sincerity. She felt it, the connection, the vulnerability, the unspoken pull. She looked away immediately, her pulse quickening with a mix of fear and longing. That night, she walked home alone even though Jordan offered to accompany her. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain, and the streetlights washed the sidewalk in golden hues. Each step was a negotiation with her conscience. She knew she was standing on a fragile line, a place where feelings could turn into actions if she wasn't vigilant. She entered her apartment, closed the door quietly behind her, and leaned against it, breathing deeply. She told herself she would stop accepting Jordan's invitations, stop nurturing conversations that warmed her more than they should, stop allowing emotional hunger to dictate her decisions. Yet she couldn't deny that for the first time in months, someone had looked at her as though she mattered. The truth she feared most was simple. She was beginning to respond to that attention. Evelyn walked to the window and looked out at the dimly lit street. She felt both guilty and hollow, torn between loyalty and longing. She wished for Caleb's presence, for his attention, for the closeness they once shared. She wished for any sign that he still saw her, but the silence inside the apartment remained unchanged. A gentle breeze ruffled the curtains, and Evelyn sensed an undeniable truth rising inside her. The boundary she once believed unbreakable was beginning to wear thin. And if things continued this way, if the distance grew, if the loneliness deepened, if the comfort Jordan offered remained, something irreversible might happen. She folded her arms tightly, as though holding herself together, aware that she stood at the edge of a choice she never imagined facing. Evelyn woke the next morning with a heaviness she couldn't shake. The emotional line she had crossed with Jordan, quiet, subtle, but undeniable, hung over her like a shadow that refused to drift away. She moved through the apartment slowly, touching familiar objects as though grounding herself in the life she still wanted to protect. Her coffee tasted muted. Her breathing felt deliberate. Even the sunlight seemed harsher, revealing corners of her conscience she wished would stay dim. Caleb returned from his business trip that evening, wearier than usual. He entered the apartment with the clatter of keys and the sigh of a man carrying burdens he no longer discussed. Evelyn greeted him with cautious warmth, unsure of how to bridge the gap that had stretched between them. He hugged her briefly, a gesture more obligatory than affectionate, and then stepped aside to check his phone. She watched him, searching for the version of him she once knew, the one who made her feel chosen. They ate dinner in quiet spurts of conversation, neither addressing the growing tension. Caleb spoke about work crises and potential promotions. Evelyn listened, nodding mechanically, aware of the emptiness blooming inside her. She wanted to tell him how she felt, to tear open the silence that had become their default language, but fear kept her still. Fear of his reaction. Fear of losing him. Fear of confirming the emotional betrayal she carried in her chest. Later that night, as Caleb slept, Evelyn lay awake beside him, her thoughts churning. She could no longer pretend that her loneliness was a temporary inconvenience. She could no longer hide behind quiet endurance. Something had changed, within her, between them, and around them, and the truth could no longer stay buried beneath politeness and routine. The first sign that Caleb sensed something was wrong came unexpectedly. A few days later, he paused mid-conversation, staring at her with a searching expression she hadn't seen in months. "You seem far away lately," he said softly. "Is everything okay?" The question pierced her. Not because it was accusatory, but because it was vulnerable, fragile, human. She opened her mouth to answer, but the words tangled. She wanted to confess, to spill everything in one desperate rush, yet the weight of her own guilt made her voice falter. "I'm just tired," she said, knowing it was only half the truth. Caleb accepted the answer without probing further, though she saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. That flicker haunted her for days. It reminded her that he wasn't blind, just overwhelmed, distracted, stretched too thin to notice the subtle fractures forming beneath the surface of their marriage. It was around this time that Jordan attempted contact again. A brief message, innocent enough, asking if she wanted company for a walk through the neighborhood park. Evelyn stared at the screen, her chest tightening. She no longer felt the rush of warmth she once did. Instead, she felt panic. What had been comforting now felt dangerous, a reminder of how far she had drifted from who she believed herself to be. She didn't respond, but avoiding Jordan didn't erase the consequences of what had already grown between them. The tension lingered in her thoughts, pressed against her conscience, and seeped into her conversations with Caleb. She had stepped out of line, and the earth beneath her seemed to tilt with every passing day. One evening, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions, Evelyn decided she could no longer live in the gray space between honesty and silence. She told Caleb she needed to talk. The seriousness in her voice made him set aside his phone instantly. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the room dim, the air thick with anticipation. "What's going on?" Caleb asked, his tone steady but concerned. Evelyn took a breath that felt like stepping off a cliff. "I haven't been honest with you," she said quietly. "And I'm sorry." Caleb's posture stiffened. She saw a mixture of worry and fear in his eyes, fear of the words he suspected were coming but wasn't prepared to hear. "I've been lonely for a long time," she continued. "I tried to push it aside, tried to understand the pressure you're under. But somewhere in that loneliness, I made choices I'm not proud of." Caleb's jaw tightened, his throat working as he processed her meaning. "Choices," he repeated, his voice nearly cracking. "Emotional choices," she clarified, her voice trembling. "I let someone else fill spaces that should have belonged to us. It never should have happened, but it did. And I'm telling you because I don't want to keep lying, not to you, and not to myself." Silence settled between them with a weight that felt almost physical. Caleb looked away, wiping a hand across his face as though trying to steady himself. The pain in his expression was raw, visceral, and deeply human. Evelyn watched it unfold with regret so profound she felt it in her bones. After a long, fragile pause, Caleb stood and walked a few steps away, his back to her. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, voice strained. "I don't even know how to feel." "You have every right to be angry," she whispered. "I'm not angry," he replied quietly. "I'm hurt." Those two words cracked something inside her. She had prepared herself for anger, for shouting, for accusation. She hadn't prepared for heartbreak spoken so softly. Caleb didn't sleep in their bedroom that night. He stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling while Evelyn lay awake behind a closed door, listening to the silence stretch between them like a fragile, fraying thread. the days that followed were careful and distant. Caleb asked for time, a request Evelyn respected fully. She did not call Jordan. She did not reach out to anyone. She simply waited, confronting every uncomfortable truth that rose to the surface of her guilt. A week later, Caleb returned to the apartment after spending time with a close relative for clarity. They sat together once more, this time with less fear and more honesty. "I don't know where this ends," Caleb said, his tone softer. "But I think we owe it to ourselves to find out whether there's anything left to rebuild." Evelyn nodded, tears forming. She didn't expect forgiveness. She didn't expect promises. She only hoped for understanding. "We can try," she whispered. Slowly. Caleb agreed. And though the path ahead was uncertain, there was something grounding in their mutual willingness to face it. As they sat together in the quiet, not touching but not entirely distant, Evelyn realized something profound. The story of a life partner isn't written in perfect chapters. It's shaped in the moments where choices falter, where truths ache, where people confront the consequences of their own humanity, and she knew, whether their marriage healed or ended, they would walk forward with a clarity they had never possessed before.